Welcome once again to Satisfied in God. We are doing and continuing with the Get Wisdom Challenge. I am so glad that you could tune in today. This is day 10 already, and so we'll be looking at Proverbs Chapter 10. Before we get to Chapter 10, I wanted to take us back for a few minutes to Proverbs 1 because I think it's important to remind ourselves that the starting point of everything that we've been studying about wisdom, what it is, what it isn't, what it promises us, how to get it, and so much more. But we have to remember that it all starts in the fear of the Lord. So let's quickly look at Proverbs 1 verses 7. It says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." The Amplified, the classic one, says, "The reverent and worshipful fear of the Lord is the beginning and the principal and choice part of knowledge, its starting point and its essence. But fools despise skillful and godly wisdom, instruction, and discipline." So the starting point, the foundation of everything that we've been looking at starts from the fear of the Lord. Okay? Now, the fear of the Lord is not about saying, I'm afraid of God. It's not that type of fear. It's about, as the Amplified says, the reverent and worshipful fear of the Lord. That's what it's about. So I wanted us to just remind ourselves of that so that as we continue, that we would have the right foundation. Because if the foundation is not right, then, what we build upon will not be solid. So before we get to chapter 10, I wanted to share what someone wrote that really blessed me. And I'll just read part of what the person wrote. It says, "From chapter 9, I learned that God has designed the universe such that we all can learn and increase in wisdom." Yes, he did. "Wisdom is always calling. And the first step to wisdom is recognizing and honoring God who knows our innermost thoughts. Folly is also calling." So true. "And sadly enough, folly seems to appeal more to us because she promises less work." And it's so true. Folly promises less work, but nothing good comes out of it. So thank you for those that have been commenting. It's always a pleasure to read and to also learn from what you have been getting. So now as we're starting chapter 10, you'll notice that things are changing. From chapter 1 to 9, it was very poetic. There was a lot of imagery, but now it changes. We shift gears. There's a lot of quick power sayings, as I like to call it. Really short proverbs. Some are easier to understand than others. Some will directly speak to you and challenge you. A lot can be learned as we continue in the Get Wisdom Challenge. So we'll start with Proverbs 1. That's one of the verses that spoke to me. It says, "The Proverbs of Solomon. A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is the grief of his mother." Now, there are two things that I learned from this. The first thing that stood out is that, when I read about sons and fathers and mothers, we tend to think about little children. But as I looked at it, I was like, how can this speak to me now? Because I have the privilege that both my parents are still alive. And the thought that came to mind is, do I make my father glad? Am I bringing grief to my mother? I am 35, but I will always be my parents' child. And the question is, do I make them glad? Do I bring grief to them? As it talks about a wise son, you can also put a wise daughter in there. And the other thing that stood out from this verse is that your wisdom or your folly doesn't just affect you. It can affect those around us, and it does affect those around us, actually. So is your wisdom benefiting your parents, benefiting those around you? Or is your folly affecting them? Something to think about. Next, let's look at verse 19. It says, "In the multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise." Now, this spoke to me because as years have been going on, I realize I speak more and more. When I was much younger, I didn't speak much. I don't speak as much as most people. I tend to be more on the quiet side. But I noticed that the more I speak, the more I'm prone to sin. Let me explain. I've noticed that the more I speak, the more I'm prone to embellish the truth, the more I'm prone to add salt and, spices to my story, the more I'm prone to, to sin in essence. Now, I'm not saying that people that talk a lot, sin. I'm just saying that the more you talk, if you're not mindful, because the next verse talks about restraining. It's not so much about how much you talk than it is about knowing when to talk, as it is about knowing when to keep quiet, as it is about knowing what to say. Okay? So this spoke to me in the sense that, okay, when I'm talking, especially when I'm talking a lot, I have to be mindful to know that my tongue, what comes out of my mouth, has the potential to lead me to sin. So I have to take control over my lips. And that is wisdom. The last verse that I want to talk about is one that really made me smile. Verse 26, and I read, "As vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes, so is the lazy man to those who send him." The Amplified says, "As vinegar to the teeth and as smoke to the eyes, so is the sluggard," the lazy person, "to those who employ and send him." And it made me laugh because I don't know if you've ever had smoke go in your eyes. It is not a pleasant sensation. It is terrible. And I imagine vinegar to the teeth also is not pleasant. And it made me laugh because, the imagery of it, but it made me realize that, I have to look at my life and ask myself, am I an irritation to my employers? As simple as that. It says that the lazy man is an irritation to those who send him, or as the Amplified says, those who employ and send him. And sometimes we tend to think, oh, the lazy person was one that does absolutely nothing. But, I want to add little things such as, being late, stealing from your employer's time or resources, or just doing the bare minimum. All those can be irritations. And so let's look at ourselves and see, am I a blessing to those who employ me, or do they consider me an irritation? And if we think we are an irritation to them, we have the capacity to change that and in wisdom be a blessing to them. So that's it from chapter 10. I hope that you're able to read all the verses and that you allow God to speak to you, because God definitely does speak through his word. Thank you for tuning in, and until tomorrow, remember that you are blessed.